Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Hi, welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow with Helen Tarrant. Now today I want to share with you what is the key decisions or the key things you should think about in making a decision in commercial property. Now some of the things that most people don't look at or don't think about in commercial property is that they get really emotional about it because they think it's very similar to residential and they want to buy a property because it's in a really lovely building, the fit out's really well, it's new, it's got depreciation. I mean, all of those things are important, but one of the things they forget about is that commercial property is not based on emotion. It's actually based on facts and figures. And one of the facts and figures that you've got to look at is firstly, how solid is your tenant? What returns you're getting? So when talking about returns, we're talking about yield. So your cash flow returns. So what that means is that how much cash flow are you getting into this property? So is it a 7%? Is it 6%? Is it a 10%? Now, they all come with their own risk, so you've got to be really careful when you're doing this to know that the risk needs to balance out the return. So if you're going to a 10% yielding property and you're a regional, you know that it might be a single driver economy, and then that means that you are not going to be getting the same amount of tenants that will potentially come through if you need to re-tenant, and that potentially you will have some downward pressure in rent. Now, if you're in Metro and you're in Sydney or Melbourne, you're in Metro, you're going to have a lot more tenant coming through, a lot more inquiries. The rents will probably go up a bit faster, but you're also accepting a lower yield potentially at 5%. Now, whether that suits you or not, that's entirely for you to decide, but ultimately for you, you have to decide if the risk is worth it. So the number one thing to the key decision is look at the return and balance your risk with your return. So there's no point going out to regional and buying a 10% property and you're not going to be able to sleep at night. At the same time, there's no point buying a 5% yielding property where it's not going to give you cash flow and you can't hold on to it. So you've got to look at that. So that's number one. Number two thing you need to look at is also the tenant. The tenant's really, really important in this equation. Unlike residential, where if your tenant leaves, just find another tenant, drop the rent by $20 and you'll be fine. It's not like that. In commercial, your tenant is one of the keys, or the potential to get a tenant is a key to the success of your commercial property. So it's in your best interest to work with your tenant so that you make sure your tenant's there for the longevity. So whether you need to do some extensions on the property, whether you need to make the property more tenantable in terms of more lettable area, maybe create a courtyard, maybe more areas for your tenant to have more space to expand into is really important. Also, the length of time your tenant's been there. So really do your research on the tenant, or if you're buying a vacant property, really look at what are the potentials of getting a new tenant. So that means that are you in the right location? Is there access? Is there parking? Has it got other like tenants so that you can draw from the same pool? So that's really about the tenant. The tenant's the number two most important thing in your portfolio, looking at the tenant for your commercial property. And number three, the third most important thing, and all you need to do is, when you're looking at a commercial property, is not create a wish list of 5 or 10 things, because you might want 5 or 10 things, but if you continue to look for them, it's like finding the unicorn that doesn't exist. So what I do suggest is when you go into number three, a third thing to think about is actually your budget. So and being really realistic with this. So finding out about, because we're in a really interesting situation at the time where banks are not lending to certain type of properties, banks are looking at you as a lender, potentially they're offering lease stock. So there's all sorts of loans out there for commercial, but you've got to work out what your budget is. And more people say, oh yes, I can buy up to $1 million, or I can buy up to 300,000. Well, the reason I'm telling you about your budget, how that's important, is not so that you have to weigh up and only go somewhere because you're only limited to 400,000. Of course, that comes into consideration. But what I want you to do is do a comparison. You see, if you know you can only buy 500,000 or 300,000 or even $1 million, I want you to compare a property at 5%, a 7%, and a 9%. This way you have a clear understanding of which one of these properties resound with you, which of these properties is going to work with you in the long term, so that you know that which best suited to you. So without a comparison, you're not going to know. And if you buy the first property you see because you let emotions run through you, let the emotions make your decision, you're going to make the mistake. So you don't want to make that mistake. You want to firstly consider the return you need. Secondly, look at the tenant and do the research on the tenant or potential tenants. And thirdly, look at your budgets and do a comparison across the board so that you get to understand, this is what I can get at 5%, this is what I can get at 7%, this is what I can get at 9%. And based on how I feel, based on the property profile, based on the tenant, my other 2 criteria, I feel that this one, whether it's 5, 7 or 9%, is best suited for me in this situation. So those 3 tips will help you to make your decision. Now, I always say when you start out with commercial property, the first 2 or 3 criteria you make for it should be non-negotiable. So if you need a long lease, that's what you should be negotiating. You should be negotiating or looking for. If you need a certain type of return or yield, that's what you should be looking for. Or if you need a certain type of growth, or you need a property that's partially vacant or in a particular location, that's got to be a criteria you can't negotiate on. But remember, if you are looking for long-term lease, you also have to be able to take the hit and be flexible on the return as well, because everything's a give and take. So if you get your first top 2 to 3 criteria, then you can negotiate the rest to the best of your ability. And I always believe that in any commercial purchase, it's not about buying the property now, how it is, it's about your journey. It's about buying a good property and in the time of owning it, making it a great property. So hopefully those 3 tips have been helpful, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the upcoming video. So in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and if you need further help, check out helentarrant.com. Bye for now.